All right, so up until this point, we've learned about how to do different graphs, bar graph, line graph, stem and leaf plot. Yesterday we learned box and whisker plots, and now today we're learning how to do histograms. Well, in order to do a histogram, you have to first do a frequency table. So I'm on example 1 on page 130. On example 1 on page 130. All right, and it gives me the number of named stars within a group of 34 different constellations, okay? So we have 34 numbers here. 34 numbers that we're going to break up into intervals. So the first thing I want to do is set up my frequency table. Okay, I want to set up my frequency table into 3 columns. Interval, tally, and frequency. Now with a frequency table, I will always give you the interval. So the interval is not something that you're going to have to figure out on your own. All right, I'm going to go ahead and pause the recording so you guys can copy down the frequency table. What's the first number in my data set? On example 1, right here, underneath the science example, what's the very first number? It's a 7. So what interval would that belong in?
4 to 7.
The 4 to 7. Okay, so I'm going to make a tally mark. Make a tally mark. So I'm going to count, that number counts in that interval. All right, now what about the next number, a 5? Okay, what interval does that belong in? 4 to 7. Okay, so another tally mark belongs there. What about 4? 4 to 7 again. What about 10? I'm just going down the list. Okay, 8 to 11, so my tally goes there. What about 5? 4 to 7. What about 7? 4 to 7. What about 2? 0 to 3. 6? No, 4 to 7. Again, 8. What about 8? 8 to 11. 1. 0 to 3. 5. 4 to 7. 1. 0 to 3. 1. Or, I'm sorry, 3. And then 1. Okay, so we got a couple more. Now 12.
12 to 15.
11. 8 to 11. 2. 0 through 3. And 11. Okay, so do you see what we're doing here? We just did the whole first row of numbers. We're going down the list and we're saying, okay, here's the number 7. What interval does it belong in? And we're filling it in, okay? So let's go ahead and fill in the rest of the frequency table, the rest of the tallies. All right? Just go ahead and fill those in, okay? So obviously we're just trying to save a little bit of time here since we're short on time today. All right, so now that I've gone through and tallied them all up, now I'm going to count how many constellations had between 0 and 3 stars. How many?
20. 10.
4. Okay, 14. Come on, count the tallies. 14. Very good. 14. Okay. So I would say 14. Now what about 4 to 7? How many? 9. What about 8 to 11? 7. And what about 12 to 15? 4. Very good. Okay, so now I've completed my frequency table. So the tallies are so I can just go down the list and I can figure out, okay, which interval does each number belong in. Then I add them up and that gives me the frequency. Now there's a way to check, okay? We said that there were 34 constellations. Well, what's 14 plus 9 plus 7 plus 4? Is that 34? Do it in your calculators or in your head real quick. 14 plus 9 is what? What's 14 plus 9?
23.
24.
23.
It's 23. Yes, 23. And then 23 plus 7? 30. And then 30 plus 4? 34. Okay, so I know that it all matches up. You want to make sure that you do that on your homework, quiz, or test so that you make sure that you didn't leave out any numbers. Okay, now that you've completed the frequency table, you can go ahead and do the histogram. Okay, now the first thing that you want to figure out with a histogram is, what are my intervals going to be on the vertical column? Well, it's always going to be the frequency, okay? Now, with the frequency, what is the highest frequency from the table that you just did? What's the highest? It's 14. So if I'm going 0 to 14, what do you think you're going to go by?
12.
Okay, you think 2s, 5s? We're going to go by 2s, okay? Now, if you chose to go by 1s or even 3s, that would be okay. But if you go by anything more than that, that would be points off. Okay, so let's go ahead and do our intervals. All right, and then our category, or I'm sorry, do our frequencies. Then our category is going to be the intervals. So 0 to 3, 4 to 7, 8 to 11, and 12 to 15. And then we need grid lines. All right, so I'll give you a minute to go ahead and copy down the outline for the histogram. All right, so now's the easy part. How many constellations fall in the 0 to 3 range? How many? 14. Very good. So go ahead and draw your bar, and then you're going to shade it in. Now, here's where it's different from the bar graph, and do this on your paper. Notice that my column is wider, and that it falls about midway between the two categories. You want that to be the case because your next column is going to be touching. Okay? With a histogram, your columns are next to each other. Be very careful that your histogram doesn't look like a big blob. You want it to have solid outlines. So you might want to do that with some kind of marker or a different color pen. But you want to make sure that you outline each column, but they must be touching. So all we did here was we plotted, okay, there were 14 constellations from 0 to 3. There were about 11. I'm sorry, there weren't 11. Hold on. Back it up. How many constellations from 4 to 7? 9. Not 11. Okay, so we shade that in. And then 8 to 11. 7. And then 12 to 15 was how many? 4. Okay. Now mine's a little off, so I'm going to erase this and rewrite it. It's important too, and it's kind of hard to do. Sometimes you might have to rewrite your categories, but your category needs to be directly under each column. So since they're touching, you're going to have to do wider columns. Don't squish all your columns together and then have your categories, just spreading all the way out across the graph. The category must be directly under the column that it matches. If it's not, I'm going to count off points. Okay, some of your histograms I'm looking at, and they just look like big blobs. They look really messy. So make sure that you're outlining, okay, just like we just talked about. Make sure that you're outlining it so that you can see a clear differential between the categories. All right? And if you understand that, that's everything you need to know for 3.5.